Welcome to another episode of The Traveling Frog. It's a long story, Jim. I'll tell you later about it. But this is a place that I want to create so I can talk to my friends and colleagues, journalists who lived the life that I've lived back in the 80s and 90s and experienced so many different moments in history and so many different moments in time. And how those moments in time affected our lives. So on today's episode, we got my really good friend Jim Miller and colleague, who was a long-time executive producer from CNN. You were in charge of some of the most interesting coverages of CNN in the 80s.
First of all, thanks, Martin, for asking me to come on here. It's a pleasure. I think what you're doing is very important to record some of the events that have taken place and with the people who were there. So many times our stories get left behind and people forget. So thank you for recording these for posterity.
Yeah, I believe that everybody sees, like we were talking earlier, everybody sees the Anderson Coopers of today, Amanpour, the reporters. But there is a team of people behind them that makes news gathering possible.
There's a massive amount of teams, and I'm hesitant to name names specifically because there are so many good people, not just from CNN days, but from all over the business back in our days, from all over the world that we have worked with that we could name. And I would hesitate to do it because I'd leave someone out, and I don't want to do that. But
let's just say they know who they are.
They know who they are, and they have done some incredible work, and some of the iconic images and video that sticks in people's minds. These people, both men and women, captured and put together.
But you were involved in coverages like the Gulf War, the liberation of Kuwait, the first Pope visit to Cuba, the hostage situation in Lima, Peru, Noriega's Panama story. Those are I'm not really sure, don't quote me on this, but I think you were there also when the wall came down, or were involved when the wall came down. These are hundreds of people operations that you were running. This is not a television crew with a reporter on the ground.
Yeah, well, first of all, I wasn't running a lot of this stuff. I was part of a lot of this stuff, of these coverage. For example, the Pope in Cuba, I was actually working for CNN Spanish and not CNN Espanol, and not for directly the CNN domestic or international network at that time. So I was just one guy in many of these cases, and I was always just one guy. Yeah, I may have been the point person. In my company, I always said a producer, the definition of is someone you never know who's there, but if anything gets screwed up, he gets all the blame. He or she gets all the blame. So, it's just not I was running it. I was just the one who got the blame if it didn't go right, and just sharing in the credit when it went right, when it did go right.
But I remember being in stories where you were always there. You were always there in the background. We knew Jim was there, but you weren't really there. You were like the guy behind the scenes who was making things easier for us, the guys running around.
Well, that's the purpose. I think that's the purpose of what a producer does, or what anyone who's assigned to do the job. Look, we're a team, and I always told all the people who worked with me that, look, you may be a camera person, you may be a video editor, you may be a sound tech, you may be a graphics person, but you're also a journalist, and you're also part of this team, and you're no less or no more than any other person on this team, and that included the correspondent or the reporter, and we all work together to make it viable.
And you also got in trouble a few times. There was you had problems in Peru where, they wanted to sue you because, tell me a little bit about that story. I was there for that story. I was with you on that story because I remember you dragged me along because you wanted me to translate or something.
Yeah. Well, first of all, when the Peru attack on the Japanese ambassador's residence happened, I was actually not there. I was in New York on another coverage in Upper New York State, or excuse me, I was in Vermont, right on the New York border, and I get a call one day from our guy on the assignment desk and said, "How long will it take you to get to Peru?" And I said, "Huh?" And he said, "How long will it take you to get to Peru?" I said, "Well, about 45 minutes. He said, "Come on, how long will it take you to get to Peru?" I said, "About 45 minutes from where I am. But why are you asking? I'm actually going to be in Peru, Vermont, in about 3 days because we had coverage planned there." And he said, "I'm talking about the country Peru." I said, "What's going on there?" I didn't know what had happened overnight down there with the attack on the ambassador's residence. And I said, "Well, I can't go. I've got to finish this project." And he said, "We'll get somebody else in there." I said, "You can't get anybody else in here because this whole coverage is in my head and not on paper anywhere, and it's already lined up. So you're going to have to live without me." So when I got to Peru about a week later, we were already set up in a building that we had kind of co-leased the basement from a company that had leased it from another lady. And the Peruvian media, the press, newspapers, were doing stories on the international media that had set up. There was scaffolding built all over the street for the residents, showing it and what was going on in the area.
I read somewhere something that I believe it was something like 4,000 international news journalists invaded Lima, Peru in that 24, 48-hour period of time.
It may have been. It may have been. I don't know. But when I got there, it was already, CNN had already set up their quarters there. So personally, I saw my wife to be, then my wife, a grand total of about 4 days between December 7th and the end of April, May.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned that because I was in Lima for, I think it was 120 days.
I felt like I was there that
and
long.
then I get pulled out, and then I'm sitting in my house in Mexico City 3 days later, and I got CNN on, and I see them taking over the house. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, I was there for 120 days, and I'm missing the pivotal moment. But I went back many times with Harris and Testoso. You know, we, through the years, follow up stories on that. But back to the subject here. Why do you think that we were, I think we were privileged to be able to travel to all these countries and live all these events?
Yeah, we were. We were a happy band of misfits who had the opportunity to go and do this. That very few people get that opportunity, both to travel the world, have someone pay for it, and have someone pay you to go do it and meet the kind of people that we do meet, not only in the famous people around the world, but also the wonderful people we meet who do what we do, and the local people also in these countries that we travel to. And very fortunate, you know, I always dreamt of this from the time I was about 5 or 6, wanting to be in television. So, I mean, it was a dream come true for me. Now I've been doing it 55 years in this business. So started when I was in high school. And I'm very blessed, still doing it to some degree, nowhere near what I was. But like you say, you were in your house, get on a plane, go halfway around the world. And I did that many, many a time and stay gone in some cases for up to a year.
How was the Pope coverage in Cuba? Remember the event that happened when we were there and everybody was there?
Yeah, I came back one day and everybody was gone. I go, "Where did everybody go?" "They're in Washington. It's a major story. It's Monica Lewinsky's story." And I said, "What is that?" And you know, I was down in Camagüey, actually with Harris again. We were down in Camagüey, Cuba to cover the Pope's mass that he held down there.
Yeah, I was there.
And we didn't know I didn't know about it. My only recollection really of that is a couple of photos I have. But when I was walking to our car that day and I was walking across this field. All of a sudden, the Pope's motorcade comes around, and there he is sitting up in his chair in the Pope mobile. I was by myself. He just waves at me. I wave at him, and he goes on down the road. So that's my memorable part of that. But, you know, it was monumental. It was a monumental trip. I was in Cuba for Gorbachev when he came. And I took Jesse Jackson. I was with Jesse Jackson's campaign in 1984 when we went down there. And Jackson used to boast that he took Castro to church, to the boarded up Baptist church in Havana, which had been closed. And he took him in there, and they held a church service with Jesse Jackson when the Pope, when he was in Cuba on his campaign for president.
Let's move to the Gulf War.
Yeah.
There's a rumor going around that you go to Arab countries these days and you're Mr. Miller, Habibi, out of everywhere the moment you get out of the airport. Is that true?
I guess so to some degree. Maybe not much today as it was then. The Middle East has changed dramatically in the last 34 years. A lot of the people that I was close to or knew have now retired. They're out of government. Some of them are still in government. The foreign minister of Saudi Arabia is one of my best friends. Former prime minister of Lebanon is a really good friend of mine. And the minister of defense in Kuwait is a really good friend of mine. So there are some people that are still around, but it has changed dramatically. And the generations, we're now over a generation and a half since the Gulf War. But that was an amazing thing that happened. And CNN was really the impetus. It wasn't Jim Miller necessarily. It's just that everybody could watch CNN. They couldn't see the other U.S. networks and pretty much any of the European networks. They could listen to the BBC back then on a radio, and they could see the BBC.
Do you remember where you were the night that the U.S. bombed Baghdad? And I was at the headline newsroom, and I looked up to the monitors, and all of a sudden I saw every monitor there with our feed, and I felt like, okay, guys, we're no longer the Chicken Noodle Network.
Well, you know, you guys were back here, so you had a better understanding of what was going on through all that time. We didn't out there. We saw the press releases that they were faxing us or they were putting in DHL and sending us every week. But it really didn't register with me. I mean, okay, it's nice. Everybody recognizes what we're doing. But the day the actual bombing, January 17th in Saudi Arabia, it was January 16th here that it actually started. That day, on the 16th, I had gotten a call from the Minister of Information. He said, I want to see you at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I said, well, can we make it a little later? I've got to drive down. He said, you're not going to drive, you're going to fly. I said, the airport's closed. He said, I am sending you a jet. So he sent a jet. I flew down to see him.
You knew it was serious then.
Yeah, I knew I was in trouble. I had met him before, and he wanted to talk to us about CNN's coverage. He didn't think we were doing enough Saudi sides of our story to cover, which wasn't true at all. I had a file yay big with written requests for all sort of Saudi elements and officials. They never responded or they turned us down. Only a couple times did they send somebody out. So I took that with me. We argue, we debate, and we say we're going to get better. So instead of flying me back, I had to drive back. Well, it's a 4.5 hour drive from Riyadh back to Dhahran. So I arrive in Dhahran about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I walk into our office, phone's ringing off the hook, nobody's around, and it's Will King, the late Will King's on the phone. He said, Jim, what's this guy who was Charles Zewe doing News Source? They said, what's he talking about all these planes going off? And I said, Will, I don't know. I literally just walked in the door from being on the road for 4.5 hours. Let me find out and I'll call you back. Just as I hung up, our TV, which was watching through AFRTS, CNN, Bernard Shaw goes, the skies of Baghdad are lighting up.
Yeah, I remember that.
So that's how I found out what was going on. And I said, well, that's what those planes are doing now. And that was the beginning of the Gulf War.
How did you manage to balance the cultural differences? You were telling me earlier that before all this, Saudi Arabia has seen maybe 10 international journalists.
It was more than that. It was about 150, maybe 200 altogether. And a lot of that was for some Arab conference that had taken place. They were bussed in and held very tightly. They weren't allowed to go out and do a lot of
Like
things.
presidential summits.
Yeah, basically. They were very controlled in those days. All of a sudden, you've got 2,500, 3,000 journalists running around all over the country. One of the first things that happened when we got there on August 14th, I had Jane Evans and Maria Fleet with me. Christiane Amanpour came a couple of days later. John Sweeney, the late John Sweeney, was our initial reporter there, and then Christiane came in to work with him. Well, I needed some video. One of the first stories we filed were on the Kuwaiti refugees who came out of Kuwait. A lot of them were staying in the hotel where we were staying, but a lot of them were being put up in what they called the Kuwaiti towers. These were apartment complexes that were built in Saudi's heyday, knowing that the country was going to grow. So while they had the money, they went ahead and spent the money and built these buildings. So I sent Jane and Maria down to get some pictures of that for our story, and they were gone, and they're gone. And I had no way of contacting them. Finally, like hours later, they come back. And I said, where have you guys been? I just needed a shot. And they said, we got detained by the police. Well, here are two women in Saudi Arabia in 1990, which is a very different story from where it is today. And she said, we had our chadors on, we covered up, but they didn't know what to do with us. Finally, they just held us on the street for about an hour and a half, and they let us go. We came back here. But that was the first introduction to culture. Norman Schwarzkopf writes in his book, It Doesn't Take a Hero, one of the big cultural issues that we had that involved CNN happened early on, about a month after the beginning of Desert Shield, when the troops started arriving. The expats at Aramco threw a USO-style talent show, and they cooked hamburgers and hot dogs, and they had Cokes and that type thing for the troops. So they were bringing them in, and they were doing these shows. Well, they invited CNN to come up and cover it. We went and we shot it. And it was also at the behest of the U.S. consulate in Dhahran also. CBS also went, but CBS, for some reason, they didn't get in trouble. CNN got in trouble because we were CNN and seen around the world. Well, the next day after we aired the story, all hell broke loose because Saddam Hussein took our video and aired it on Iraqi TV saying the custodian of the two holy mosques let the infidels in, and this is what's going on now. Women dancing. He put in their fashion shows in Paris saying this is taking place in Riyadh and some other things, and it just went downhill from there. So we had to go. We had to meet with the king, met with Schwarzkopf, and Schwarzkopf writes about, here I am trying to plan a battle, and I got to take time to do this. I told the king, and I told the Minister of Information at the time, I said, look, we're both heading down a road we've never been on, either one of us. And there are probably going to be missteps. We apologize, and we will not make that again.
You had to deal with a lot of roads that no one had ever been down before,
Yeah.
like the Holy Place. CNN
Took 8 years to make that happen, both with the Saudis and with CNN. And we are the first, and as far as I know, still the only television network to actually broadcast live television programming from inside the Holy Mosque in Mecca, the Haram. And we did it 4 or 5 times myself. When we got ready to do the first shot with Riz Khan, we were about 30 minutes away from airtime. And Riz calls me and said, Jim, they're not going to let us do this. I said, what? I happened to be standing outside the Minister of Information's office at the time, and I went in to see him, and I said, what's going on? He said, why can't I give you something down on the plaza? There's a huge plaza in Mecca surrounding the mosque. He said, I can give you that. And I said, look, if I'm talking about Islam and the importance of it, would you rather see the Kaaba, the center of Islam, in the background, or would you rather see a brick wall? And he said, go do it. 30 minutes after we did that first live shot, King Fahd called the Minister of Information, Fahd al-Farsi, and said, this is unbelievable. I just had a call from King Hussein of Jordan, Sukarno in Indonesia, and 2 other leaders thanking me for doing this. He said, whatever CNN wants, give it to them. And from there on out, it was open. And from there on out, the Saudis wanted us to do it year after year for a long time.
Did Ted Turner's vision of live news coverage and opening a 24-hour news network in Atlanta, not in New York where all the big boys were, change the way television news around the world was covered?
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. For one thing, you had this young band of rebels, so to speak. There were some experienced veterans of broadcasting at the helm, but you had a lot of young little soldiers out there who were willing to do whatever to both break into this business, but show that we could do what they do. I came in through another realm into CNN in 1984 was the first time I showed up, but I started at Turner in 83. And I worked for one of those big executives who was president of CBS before he came to Turner. And I remember one of the first things in 84 on the political campaigns, we get on a bus in New York City and all the union crews were just blasting us. Get off the bus, Chicken Noodle News, Cheap News Network, CNN, go. They didn't want us there. Yet we became very, very, very good friends in the long run with these people. And
yeah, we made lifelong friends.
We made lifelong friends from around the world.
That's
because
today.
they respected us for sticking to it and going through the schoolyard bullies to a certain degree, and we kind of made our own way. I remember a couple of times when we were at a feed point and somebody wanted to feed from one of the other networks. We had a satellite, and they said, man, I wish we could feed, but they've already gone home for the night or something. I said, you want to feed? So I had actually Leon Harris, who's now one of the anchors in Washington, D.C., was working our satellite desk back in those days. This is how far back this goes. Said, hey, Leon, can you get somebody on the phone at ABC? They got something they want to feed, but their people are all gone. He said, yeah, I was just talking to the guy. So he calls him up, and we were able to do that. They were extremely impressed.
In the case of Espanol, there was an NBC attempt to create a 24-hour news network in Espanol, and it lasted like a year and a half. I mean, Canal de Noticias NBC out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was part of the people who went to Canal de Noticias NBC and left quickly, come back to CNN because CNN had it right. It was sort of kind of a teaching university. You could go in as a VJ and draw your path of where you wanted to go, whether you wanted to go into production, whether you're going to be a cameraman, an editor, a field producer. Everybody sort of kind of taught everybody a little bit of everything. And I have never seen anything like that in any other network.
Yeah, I mean, no. I mean, you had to. When I started in this business, like I say, almost 55 years ago now, it was very difficult to get in. I personally was told that I had a face for newspapers and a voice for newspapers and a face for radio. So I had no chance, but I just kept on keeping on, and it became a very closed fraternity. But if you put the effort in, you got there. CNN kind of opened it up that if you had the initiative and the willpower to get to where you wanted to go, and you went through the program, then you had a PhD almost in television production and journalism, and what you went through that you couldn't find in any college in those days, and it was very hands-on. There are some people today, Cristiano Amanpour, for example, started off as a desk assistant in a BJ. So, you know, there's no holding back. As you said, presidents of El Salvador and other high-ranking places around the world, former CNNers have gone.
Or little Claudia Rebasa, who then became, you know, CNN correspondent in London.
Yep.
She was a young Peruvian girl that we hired to be a production assistant during the duration of the hostage situation. And now
Josefina Townsend became a leader in,
Townsend.
became a real leader in Peru in the Congress down there.
Yeah, the days were different. It was a different world.
Well, the whole thing, all of journalism was different in those days from where we are today and what we're doing. But again, I compliment you and I praise you for what you're doing here, because there are so many great stories from so many wonderful people that deserve to be recorded and told before they do get lost in the midst of everything.
Yeah, I was with Sarela last week. We were actually kicking the can down the road, as he called it. We were doing a story on migration at the border, Texas border, and when I talked to him, he told me a story about being in Haiti for Baby Duck, and they were covering a demonstration that we who lived and went to Haiti know those demonstrations would get violent quickly. And they were in the back of the demo. They heard shots got fired, somebody started shooting at them, they hid behind a pillar, and then he went back to the hotel and he sent them a telex to Atlanta. This happened, we don't have footage, but somebody was shooting at us. And he gets a one-word response: duck.
Different days back then, different days. Haiti was a real interesting story. I was there in '86 when Baby Doc left, and I was back in '93 and '94 and '95 for the coup with Aristide. And I got to be really good friends with General Cedras, who was part of that coup, or part of that leadership that took over when Aristide left. There were some good guys and some bad guys in all of that.
Haiti is a different animal. I've been there a few times, and yeah, he lives a notch. And I grew up in Guatemala, a country at war, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, you know, the Central American, the triangles.
Yeah.
But Haiti is a different animal.
Yeah.
So, I was there for the earthquake, and that was rough.
I almost went down there for the earthquake for FEMA, actually, where I work now as a reservist when they need me, and producing videos for them. And they had called me and asked me to go, but before I said sure, but before I actually left, they pulled the plug on what they wanted me to do. So, but they still went down there and aided on a humanitarian basis, their expertise in terms of disaster relief and coverage. But I haven't been back to Haiti since '95, I guess.
So you're also substitute teaching sometimes these days. So what do you tell those young students of today who want to go into the world of television news?
I really haven't changed my whole description of that from years ago when somebody say, I want to be a journalist, I want to be a reporter. What do I need to do in school? I said, study everything you can. One of the things that's a sad point to me today is there's not enough broadcast journalism history being taught. And a lot of people have no clue of what came before them other than what we are now. And this business is totally different today than what it was in our day 30 years ago, where we were just television. Now we're the internet.
Is the business different, or is the people running the business?
Well, I think the overall people are definitely different to a large degree because it's all money and how much can we have. I think it's always been there, but they've also realized that they can do both. They can spend money to make money, Now it's just, let's just make money. And it's cheaper to put somebody in a box and talk to talking heads as opposed to going out and putting crews on the ground covering different things. Well, in 1984, 1988, 1992, I was the boys on the bus for a lot of those presidential campaigns, and it was a great time. It was a lot of work, but it was a great time.
Oh yeah, I remember.
And it was a cost a lot of money to do that too. It was very expensive. So I can see where combining all this together into a pool situation would be much easier and advantageous for these networks.
It's a different world out there. I was talking to my friend Tyrone the other day, and I was like, dude, all I do is live shots. I get hired by a network. I go to a live position. I set my stuff up. I put on my live view, and we do live shots every hour on the hour. He said something funny after that we will leave out of this conversation right now. But it's true. A lot of times I get to go to the border because I live in Texas. The border is the story, and we set up by the river, by the bridge, and we don't move. We're there.
You don't go and talk to any of the migrants coming across?
We're not allowed to talk to the migrants because if we even get anywhere near the migrants, we'll be arrested for aiding a migrant. No, we're not even allowed to give them a cigarette. And they walk right in front of us. But Texas and Operation Lone Star is a different ball game.
Yeah. But in our day, we would have efforted. We would have efforted comments from them.
Right. We would have gone after them. We would have talked to them. We would have made the effort at least. Today, no.
Well, I'm not faulting the journalists today. I mean, there are rules and there are regulations, and you don't want to get arrested trying to do your job, and it just hampers the whole situation.
But I also think that it's not about it's sort of kind of a perception issue because I've lived these situations where here I am with a news network, and then the guy on my right side has an iPhone, and he's a streamer, and he's saying whatever comes to his mind at the time. And I turn around and look at the guy like, dude, we're watching the same picture. We're seeing the same thing, So the people in authority, the people who are there, they don't know, are you really media? Are you a real journalist? Do you represent something real, or are you just a guy that's hidden the lights?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the world of journalism has changed a lot.
Oh yeah.
But I really
in many ways it's good. In many ways, there's video available that you may not have to explain what happened.
Yeah.
For example, I just working with FEMA spent 5.5 months out in Maui on the wildfires that happened there last August in Lahaina that really devastated the downtown portion of Lahaina. And I had to really scrape to find video of the fires to explain the event, to illustrate the event. I had body cam footage from the police that they made available, and I had that to use. Unfortunately, when it got to my superiors in Washington, they would not air it because it was too traumatic. So you're also dealing with that issue back and forth. Whereas news networks today will tell you some of this video may be disturbing, but we're going to show it to you anyway.
And they're still not showing the reality of what it is.
Yeah.
Because the society has changed.
Yeah, society has changed. The whole culture of everything has changed. So, it's a different way, a different world. We were talking earlier, would I want to be in this business today? No way. No way. I don't have what it takes to put up with this every day and all the run and gun to do.
I actually had a 19-year-old daughter who wanted to go into the business and said, no way, Jose.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No.
I am so grateful I got to do it. I really am. And
I wouldn't change it for the world.
On my headstone, I hope they say, let's make TV is the epitaph on my headstone. But we were very fortunate during the time and during the day. And like I say, there are myriads of great people I have met who are just beyond belief. And I'm very fortunate to have known and worked with some of the best ever in this business. And I thank you for having me here.
No, Jim, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. I hope this is the first one of, maybe we can do another one sometime.
Inshallah, as they say in the Middle East. Thank you.
Mr. Habibi.
Gracias.
Thanks, Jim.
Ciao.